Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining our presentation, Searching for System Leverage. We're really happy to be able to present our experiences and insights from a group model building project that we implemented for Habitat for Humanity on the topic of adequate housing in Kenya. And I worked together on this project together with my colleagues Kaveh Dianati, Alec Eckert, and Stephen Arndt. I would like to start with two pictures. On the left, we see Kibera, one of the largest slums in Kenya as well as in Africa. People live there in very poor conditions, have limited access to infrastructure, to education, as well as to health services. And on the right side, just a few kilometers away from Kibera, we see one of the many apartment complexes with a very high level, almost luxury standard that are planned in Nairobi. And these two neighborhoods, Kibera, Kilimani, are actually really neighboring each other. They're just a few kilometers away, showing the increasing tension and contradiction in the housing sector in Kenya. The housing situation in Kenya is very urgent. There's currently a national housing deficit of over 2 million and growing by 200,000 each year. 56% of urban households actually live in slums, and urban environments grow fast with 5% per year. And as you can see on the graph on the right, the World Bank expects even a rising urban housing need in the future years. The reasons for this situation are also very complex. There's reported lack of formally trained construction labor, rising land prices, materials make up a huge share of the total construction cost, and there's a lack of affordable financing for homeowners. One of the actors who's trying to change the situation in the system is Habitat for Humanity, which envisions a world where everyone has a decent place to live. And they had very successful initiatives, especially considering incremental housing and water and sanitation projects, but they are missing a larger change and ripple effects within the greater system. They also cooperate a lot with national partners, but partly the discussions are inefficient and very quickly focus on solutions rather than the problem. That's why Habitat for Humanity contacted us, the Millennium Institute, and our project team to develop a shared and systemic understanding among Habitat for Humanity and key stakeholders about the issues and opportunities in the housing sector in Kenya. The leading research question was here, which dynamics drive inadequate housing in Kenya? And for us internally, as the Millennium Institute normally uses quantitative modeling, it was also interesting to see to what extent can a qualitative modeling approach provide benefits for a strategy formulation. Here's an overview of the process that we followed. So in the beginning, we started with a desk research to collect information about the housing situation in Kenya and also to review some system dynamics research on housing. Then we traveled to Nairobi to prepare and facilitate a participatory modeling workshop with around 25 participants from Habitat for Humanity, but also from the government, academia, and the business sector. And there, the plan was to develop a qualitative model, a causal loop diagram. And in the end, we finalized the CLD and then reported the summary of the workshop's insights to Habitat so they can use these insights for their strategy formulation. So you can see here that the project was very short timed, and that's why also only the development of a qualitative model was realistic in this very short time frame. I don't want to dive too deep into the desk research. Just want to share two insights here with you. First of all, adequate housing, according to UN Habitat, is more than just 4 walls and a roof. It actually comprises other functions as well as tenure security, basic services, affordability, accessibility, and cultural adequacy. And its impact is also very wide, as it is a prerequisite for education, health, privacy, social security, and also the ability to work. And according to Eskenazi, in his PhD thesis, system dynamics is very well suited to represent the actual processes within the very complex web of supply and demand in the housing sector. And it also is able to develop a shared system understanding among the various actors in the system. And then we actually traveled to Nairobi to meet with Habitat and the stakeholders. And you see a picture from the workshop and us in action. One day we even had a special guest who was also very curious about what's happening in the housing sector in Kenya. And yeah, in the workshop we had different activities that we facilitated with the participants. We started with a visioning exercise where we developed a guiding star for the future of the housing system in Kenya. Then we elicited together the variables, particularly the KPIs, policies, and other important driving factors that influence the housing system. Then in another activity, we asked the participants to choose a variable that they think is very important and draw the graph over time so that we can actually see how did this variable develop and also what are hopes and fears for the future of the development of this variable. And then the majority of the workshop time we spent on developing a causal loop diagram together with the participants. For the causal loop diagram, we actually prepared a concept model, so like a starting model structure that helps to spark the discussion among the participants. And we derived that from the housing research, from the 4-quadrant model by D. Pascal and Wheaton. And it basically says that with a higher housing demand, the housing deficit grows, which increases the housing price, which increases the potential profit of developers, which then sparks more housing construction, which with a time delay increases the housing supply and therefore reduces the housing deficit. So this is kind of the idealized market mechanism that is able to close the housing gap or at least reduce the housing deficit. Obviously, as we've just seen on the data, this doesn't work, or at least doesn't work very successfully. So we also gave this question to the participants: why do you think, what are other factors that are kind of keeping this balancing loop from working effectively? And we followed a backwards modeling approach so that we slowly expanded the model and saw what are the driving factors around this variable. So in this case, we actually also have development costs, which are influencing developer profit. And these developer costs, on the other hand, depend mostly on the price of labor, the price of material and equipment, and the land price. And in this example, if we focus on land price, so what drives land price? We identified it's the land availability, it's the land demand, as well as speculation with land. And land demand, on the other hand, is driven by the actual housing construction by the developers, closing here the balancing loop that land demand actually drives the land costs and the development costs up. And in this little snippet of the CLD, we also have another loop, actually a very strong reinforcing loop, that the higher the development costs, the higher the housing price. And with the higher housing prices, there's an increase in land speculation that further increases land price and development costs. And this was also reported by the participants that this is a very strong, dominant, vicious cycle of land speculation. Of course, the process was not always as neat as shown in this little example. As we can see here, it sometimes also became messy and the discussions went into various directions. However, after discussing and brushing up the CLD, this was kind of our final model that we developed within the workshop after 2.5 days. And we have here, so the 4 different sectors that we presented. And just in a nutshell, what is the narrative of this CLD? Basically, we have an increased housing demand due to migration, which increases the housing deficit, and the market mechanisms are not able to close the gap because of increasing development costs, because land prices, material and equipment prices, as well as labor prices are rising due to the increased construction demand, and their supply cannot adjust as quickly as needed. With a high housing deficit, that means a lot of households are driven into inadequate housing, where they don't have basic services, with a negative impact on their health and well-being, kind of trapping them within the inadequacy and poverty. Infrastructure is one way to improve the services, but its investors also need to focus or do focus on service cost recovery. So infrastructure investments are also limited. In the financing sector, we have especially 3 reinforcing loops, which kind of currently hinder the uptake of microfinances for housing owners. And based on this CLD, we then used the last day to look at interventions. So first we collected interventions from the stakeholders and identified where in the system they would actually influence our structure. And based on this, we asked the participants in a plenary discussion to place the interventions on this impact feasibility matrix. There, we actually quickly realized that participants then tended to move back to old habits of discussing and didn't focus enough on the different loops and factors that we identify in the map. So we actually thought about an additional exercise for the interventions to make this impact clearer. So we did what we would call like a mental simulation of the CLD, obviously with great caution. And here on the right, you can see 2 examples. So we said, if we wouldn't change anything in the system, how would then housing construction develop in the future? That's the black line. And in this case, the intervention of training support, what long-term impact could we expect? And here we see there would be an immediate impact, but it would be relatively low because it doesn't lead to ripple effects or uses any reinforcing loops. On the other hand, here's another example, investments in decentralized infrastructure. They would take a long time until they actually show results due to the delay. But then this would actually help people to escape the poverty trap. So they would turn the vicious cycle into a virtuous one. And that's why this might be very promising in the long-term future. And based on those insights, we were then able to reorganize the interventions on our feasibility impact map. And this analysis of the leverage points together with the system map, we then provided to Habitat for Humanity as the workshop results, which they use then as an input for their strategy formulation. And of course, for us as a facilitation team, it was interesting to reflect on the workshop. For that, we used the evaluation criteria for group model building, which looks at the individual, group, organizational, and methodical dimension of the workshop. So on the individual level, we saw a lot of positive reaction from the participants. They're really eager to participate, and they also gained insights into other sectors other than their daily work. Although dynamic learning was limited because it was just a qualitative model in this case. On a group level, we saw a lot of positive impacts. The workshop was a safe space away from daily work for communication. The structure, that the model helped to develop a common structure among the participants, and also improve communication through a shared system language. On an organizational level, the workshop helped to introduce the systemic approach into the organization, and we hope they will continue with it. Although the impact analysis, of course, again, because no quantitative simulation was performed, was limited. The method itself was highly efficient considering the short time frame, and the organization also showed a clear intention to continue the system approach. And then very quick to summarize. So in our opinion, qualitative modeling can be a very successful first step of a system inquiry. It has a very low entry barrier. It helps to structure the problem, deliver first insights. It engages stakeholders, provides a shared understanding, introduces a systemic perspective, helps the organization to develop a more systemic theory of change than they would have developed otherwise. And it also provides a framework for monitoring and data collection. On the other hand, we also see the need for subsequent quantitative modeling to, among others, validate assumptions, to learn about the dynamics in the system, and also to actually be able to simulate policies. And here on the right, we see one framework by Van den Belt, which actually shows such an iterative approach, starting with a qualitative model and then going into more quantitative modeling over time. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed those little insights into our GMB workshop. Thank you.